The audience thought Elvis Presley had forgotten the words. They were wrong. The greatest performer in America had never forgotten this song. He had sung it thousands of times. He could have performed it with his eyes closed. But on this night, something happened that no rehearsal, no security team, and no amount of fame could prepare him for. Before the final applause, before the headlines, before millions would hear the story, there was only one sound that cut through the music like a knife: a child crying. And from that moment on, this was no longer a concert. It became a test of character. The lights inside the Las Vegas Hilton shimmered like stars trapped beneath crystal glass. Every seat was filled. Every aisle was crowded. The air buzzed with anticipation, perfume, cigar smoke, laughter, and excitement. People had traveled from every corner of the country. Some had spent months saving money. Others had driven through the night. Many believed they were witnessing the greatest entertainer who had ever lived. The orchestra stood ready. The backup singers smiled. The musicians exchanged confident glances. Everything was exactly as it had been hundreds of times before, except no one knew that this performance would never be remembered for its music. Behind the curtain stood Elvis Presley. He adjusted the cuffs of his white jumpsuit, decorated with sparkling stones that reflected the stage lights like tiny stars. A gold cross rested quietly against his chest. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, not because he was nervous. He simply wanted to remind himself why he walked onto that stage every night. Music had rescued him long before fame ever found him. It had carried him out of poverty. It had carried him through heartbreak. It had carried him across the world. Tonight, like every night, he intended to give every person in that room something they would never forget. The announcer spoke his name. The audience exploded. The curtain opened. The roar that greeted Elvis felt almost physical. Thousands of people rose to their feet before he had sung a single note. Some screamed, some cried, some simply stood frozen, unable to believe they were finally seeing him in person. Elvis smiled. Not the practiced smile of a celebrity, the grateful smile of a man who never forgot where he came from. He waved toward every section of the audience. He pointed toward children sitting on their parents' laps. He saluted several veterans near the front rows. He shook hands with fans close enough to reach him. Even after years of worldwide fame, he still believed every person deserved to feel seen. The concert unfolded beautifully. Every song landed perfectly. Every joke earned laughter. Every smile returned twice as brightly from the crowd. The orchestra played as if they shared one heartbeat. The backup singers sounded flawless. Everything about the evening felt effortless. Then came the song everyone had been waiting for. The first gentle notes of "Can't Help Falling in Love" drifted through the showroom. An almost magical silence settled over the audience. Couples reached for each other's hands. Parents lifted children so they could see better. Even the waiters paused where they stood. Elvis wrapped both hands around the microphone. His voice emerged soft and warm. "Wise men say." The audience melted into the melody. Some quietly sang along. Others wiped tears from their eyes. For a few beautiful moments, nothing else in the world seemed to exist. But Elvis had developed a habit over the years. While singing, he watched people. Not because he was distracted, because he cared. He believed the audience deserved more than a performance. They deserved a connection. His eyes slowly moved across the front rows. A young couple smiling, an elderly woman quietly crying, a little girl waving excitedly, a soldier holding his wife's hand. Then his eyes stopped. Something felt wrong. A man in the third row leaned sharply toward the little boy sitting beside him. At first, Elvis assumed the father was whispering something, perhaps telling the child to sit still, perhaps asking him to be quiet. Then the man's shoulder pulled back. His arm moved fast, too fast. The crack echoed through the room. An open hand slammed across the little boy's face with such force that his small body lurched sideways against the armrest. His eyes widened in shock. He didn't even cry immediately. For one terrible second, he simply stared, as though his young mind couldn't understand why the person meant to protect him had become the one who hurt him. Then the tears came, silent at first, then uncontrollable. Elvis never finished the next word. His voice vanished in the middle of the sentence. The microphone carried only silence. The orchestra continued playing for another few seconds. The guitarist frowned. The pianist looked up. The drummer slowly lowered his sticks. One by one, the music died, until 15,000 people found themselves surrounded by a silence so complete that every breath seemed loud. Confused whispers spread across the room. People looked toward the stage. Some thought Elvis had become ill. Others wondered if the sound system had failed. No one understood. Except one man, Elvis. He never looked away from the third row. His smile disappeared. The warmth that usually filled his face was replaced by something almost frightening. Calm, focused, unshakable. Behind the curtain, Joe Esposito immediately sensed danger. He had spent years beside Elvis. He knew every expression, every habit, every warning sign. Whatever had just happened, it mattered. Joe hurried toward the stage. "Elvis?" No response. Elvis slowly stepped closer to the edge of the stage. The spotlight followed him. Thousands of eyes followed the spotlight. He lifted one hand. His finger pointed directly toward the third row. Like a wave, the audience turned to look. The man froze. For the first time since striking the child, he realized someone had witnessed everything. Not just anyone. Elvis Presley. The father shifted nervously in his seat. He looked around, hoping to disappear into the crowd, but there was nowhere left to hide. Elvis leaned toward the microphone. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost a whisper. Yet every single person inside the showroom heard every word. "The gentleman in the third row." Another long silence. "You didn't think anyone saw what you just did." The man's face drained of color. The audience exchanged nervous glances. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the waiters stood frozen. Elvis's eyes never left the frightened little boy. Then came the sentence that changed the entire night. "I saw you strike that child." The room exploded into shocked gasps. Thousands of heads turned toward the third row. The little boy sat trembling beside his mother, one small hand covering his burning cheek. His mother looked devastated. The father stared back at Elvis, caught between embarrassment and anger. Neither man blinked. For several endless seconds, the world's biggest entertainer and one furious father locked eyes across a silent room, and everyone could feel that whatever happened next would never be forgotten. For what felt like an eternity, no one breathed. The silence inside the Las Vegas Hilton had become heavier than the music that had filled it only moments before. Thousands of people sat frozen, their eyes locked on the same man in the third row. The father tried to force a smile. It disappeared almost instantly. He had expected embarrassment. He had expected angry looks. He had never imagined that Elvis Presley himself would stop an entire concert because of what he had done. Elvis remained perfectly still. His voice stayed calm. But anyone who truly knew him understood something important. The quieter Elvis became, the more dangerous the moment was. He looked directly at the man. "Stand up." The words were simple. There was no shouting, no dramatic gesture, yet they carried the weight of absolute authority. The man glanced around as though pretending he had not heard. His wife gently touched his arm. "Gerald." He pulled his arm away. "I'm not standing." Elvis did not repeat himself immediately. Instead, he waited. The entire room waited with him. Sometimes silence speaks louder than anger. Finally, Elvis spoke again. "Stand up." This time there was no room for misunderstanding. Slowly, reluctantly, the man rose from his seat. His face was hard, his jaw clenched. He tried to project confidence, but confidence disappears quickly when 15,000 people are staring at you. Elvis studied him for several seconds. Then his eyes shifted toward the little boy. The child could not have been older than 8. Tiny fingers still covered the bright red mark on his cheek. His shoulders trembled. He wasn't making a sound anymore. He was trying to be brave. That somehow hurt even more. Elvis looked back at the father. "Did you hit him?" The man folded his arms. "He's my son. I asked you a question." The father shrugged. "He wasn't behaving." A ripple of disbelief spread through the audience. People looked at one another in horror. Was he actually trying to justify it? The father continued. "I disciplined my own child." His voice grew louder. "It's none of your business." The words echoed through the showroom. For a brief second, no one moved. Then Elvis slowly nodded. "It became my business." His voice remained almost frighteningly calm. "The moment you decided to hurt a child in front of thousands of people." The audience erupted into applause. Not cheering, not screaming. Applause. Long, powerful, relentless. It rolled through the room like thunder. The father looked around. Every face he saw carried the same expression. Disappointment, disgust, judgment. For the first time that night, he realized he was completely alone. Joe Esposito stepped beside Elvis. His voice was low. "Elvis, let security handle this. We don't need you involved." Elvis never looked away from the third row. "Joe." His answer was barely above a whisper. "If security had seen it first, I wouldn't have needed to." Joe understood immediately. This was no longer about protocol. This was about principle. Elvis reached for the microphone once more. "Security." Several guards immediately moved toward the aisle. Unlike before, none of them hesitated. "Escort that gentleman outside." The father laughed. It was a nervous laugh. "You can't throw me out. I bought these tickets. I paid good money." Elvis answered without hesitation. "You paid to watch a concert. You didn't pay for the right to hurt a child." Another wave of applause crashed through the room. The security guards reached the third row. "Sir." You need to come with us. The father refused. I'm staying. One guard reached for his arm. He jerked away. Don't touch me. The tension inside the room exploded. Several audience members instinctively stood. Others leaned forward. Everyone sensed the same thing. This situation was seconds away from becoming something much bigger. Joe turned quickly. Elvis? Please stay on the stage. But Elvis had already made his decision. He slowly removed the microphone from its stand. He handed it to one of the backup singers. Without saying another word, he stepped toward the stairs. Joe's heart dropped. No. Not because he doubted Elvis. Because he knew Elvis. Once he made up his mind, nothing could stop him. The audience instinctively parted as Elvis walked down the aisle. No music played. No one spoke. Only the sound of his boots echoed across the showroom floor. Step, step, step. Every movement felt larger than life. The father watched him coming. His confidence disappeared with every step Elvis took. By the time Elvis reached the third row, the distance between them had shrunk to only a few feet. Elvis stood directly in front of him. Neither man spoke. Neither looked away. The entire showroom felt frozen in time. Finally, Elvis broke the silence. Look at your son. The father refused. I said. Elvis's voice became firmer. Look at him. Slowly, the man turned. The little boy sat shaking in his seat. Fresh tears rolled silently down his face. The bright outline of 5 fingers remained clearly visible on his cheek. Elvis spoke quietly. So that's what victory looks like to you. The father swallowed. You don't understand. No, Elvis replied. I understand perfectly. You didn't lose your temper. You made a choice. You chose someone smaller than yourself. Those words landed harder than any punch. The father had no answer. Elvis stepped even closer. His voice remained calm. If you wanted to prove how strong you are, you picked the weakest person in the room. That isn't strength. That's cowardice. An audible gasp swept across the audience. The father looked down. For the first time, he could not meet Elvis's eyes. Elvis turned toward the frightened child. Everything about him changed. The anger disappeared. His voice softened. He knelt until they were eye level. Hey there. The boy slowly looked up. What is your name, son? Michael. Michael. Elvis smiled gently. I need you to hear me. You didn't do anything wrong. You hear me? The little boy nodded through tears. You did nothing to deserve what happened. More people in the audience began wiping away tears. Even some of the musicians struggled to hold back emotion. Elvis placed one reassuring hand on the child's shoulder. There are a whole lot of people in this room. He slowly looked around the showroom, and every single one of them is on your side. The audience rose to its feet almost as one. The applause that followed shook the entire building. People weren't applauding a celebrity anymore. They were applauding a man who had chosen courage over comfort. Elvis slowly stood. He looked back toward the security guards. His expression hardened once again. This gentleman, he paused, is leaving. The guards stepped forward. This time, the father didn't resist. Without another word, he lowered his head. As security escorted him toward the exit, thousands of eyes followed him. Not with anger, with shame. The doors finally closed behind him. The room remained silent. Elvis looked toward the stage, then back at the little boy, then at the thousands of people watching him. He slowly lifted the microphone once more. His next words would become one of the most unforgettable moments of his entire career. The doors closed behind the father. The sound echoed through the showroom like the final note of a storm. No one applauded. No one spoke. 15,000 people remained standing, watching Elvis as he slowly turned back toward the stage. For a few seconds he didn't move. His eyes returned to the little boy. Michael still sat beside his mother, his small hands trembling in his lap. His mother wrapped one arm around him, tears streaming silently down her face. She wasn't crying because the concert had been interrupted. She was crying because, for the first time in a very long time, someone had stepped in. Someone had finally said, "Enough." Elvis walked back toward the stage without saying a word. The audience instinctively moved aside, creating a path for him. No one wanted to interrupt the moment. No one wanted to break the silence. It felt sacred. When Elvis climbed back onto the stage, he looked across the sea of faces before him. He could see people wiping tears from their eyes. Even members of the orchestra looked emotional. Joe Esposito stood nearby, watching quietly. He had seen Elvis angry. He had seen Elvis heartbroken. He had seen Elvis exhausted. But he had never seen him like this. Elvis stepped to the microphone. For several long seconds, he simply looked at the audience. Then he spoke. "My friends." His voice was softer than anyone expected. "I owe every one of you an apology." The audience immediately shook their heads. Some even shouted, "No!" Elvis smiled gently. "I came here tonight to sing." He paused. "But sometimes life writes a different song." The room became completely silent again. "I've been blessed beyond anything I ever imagined. I've stood on stages all over the world. I've met kings. I've met presidents. I've received awards I never dreamed of. But none of those things mean anything if I ignore a child asking for help with his eyes." A wave of emotion swept through the audience. Elvis continued. "When I was a little boy, my parents didn't have much. We weren't rich. We didn't have fancy clothes. But my mother taught me something I'll carry for the rest of my life." He placed one hand over his heart. She told me, "If God gives you a voice, use it for people who don't have one." The showroom fell into absolute silence. So tonight, I wasn't protecting a concert. I was protecting a little boy. For a moment, no one reacted. Then the entire showroom erupted. People rose to their feet. The applause was deafening. It rolled through the Hilton like thunder. Some people cried openly. Others hugged complete strangers. Even seasoned security guards found themselves blinking away tears. The standing ovation continued. 1 minute, then another. Elvis never interrupted it. He simply stood there with his head slightly bowed. When the applause finally settled, he looked toward Michael once again. He smiled. "Young man, I think you deserve a better seat." The audience laughed warmly. Several security officers immediately approached. Within moments, Michael and his mother were escorted to seats directly in front of the stage. The audience applauded again as they sat down. For the first time that night, Michael smiled. It was a small smile, but it was real. Elvis noticed it immediately. "Now," he said with a grin, "I think we have a song to finish." The orchestra smiled. The conductor lifted his baton. The first gentle notes of "Can't Help Falling in Love" floated once again through the showroom. This time, every word carried more meaning. Every lyric sounded different. When Elvis reached the line, "Take my hand," he looked directly at Michael. The little boy smiled wider. His mother quietly squeezed his hand. By the final chorus, thousands of people were singing together. Not because they had planned to, because they felt connected. For those few minutes, 15,000 strangers became one family. When the final note faded away, the applause seemed endless. But the night wasn't over. Backstage, after the audience had gone home, Elvis removed his jeweled cape and sat quietly in his dressing room. He looked tired, not physically, emotionally. There was a gentle knock on the door. Joe stepped inside. "The mother is here. She'd like to thank you." Elvis nodded. "Bring them in." A few moments later, Sandra entered, holding Michael's hand. She looked nervous. Her eyes were still red from crying. Michael wore an oversized smile. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then Sandra broke the silence. "Mr. Presley." "I've been trying to think of the right words." "I can't find them." "You don't have to," Elvis answered softly. He knelt so he was eye level with Michael. "Did you enjoy the rest of the concert?" Michael nodded eagerly. "It was the best night of my life." Elvis chuckled. "I'm glad." He looked around the dressing room, then slowly untied one of the white silk scarves resting around his neck. Throughout his concerts, fans dreamed of catching one. Tonight, it belonged somewhere else. Elvis gently placed it around Michael's shoulders. "I think this looks better on you." Michael's eyes grew wide. He carefully touched the scarf as though it were priceless. "It really belongs to me?" Elvis smiled. "It sure does." "But I want something in return." Michael looked worried. "What?" Elvis extended his hand. "I want your promise." The boy placed his tiny hand into Elvis's. "When you grow up." "If you ever see someone smaller being hurt." "You stand beside them." "You don't look away." "You understand?" Michael nodded. "I promise." Elvis smiled. "That's worth more to me than any award." Sandra quietly wiped away another tear. Before leaving, Elvis handed her a small card. It contained contact information for people who could help families facing violence. He didn't ask questions. He didn't judge. He simply said, "If you ever need help, you don't have to face it alone." Sandra held the card tightly. "Thank you." "No," Elvis replied. "Take care of that young man. He's going to make this world better someday." Years passed. Music changed. Generations changed. The lights of Las Vegas continued to shine. But one memory refused to fade. Michael never forgot that night. As he grew older, he often remembered the moment an entire concert stopped because one man refused to ignore a frightened child. That single act changed the way he saw himself. It taught him that violence was never normal, that silence helps the person doing wrong. That courage sometimes begins with one person willing to stand up while everyone else remains seated. Inspired by that night, Michael dedicated his life to helping vulnerable children. He became a teacher, then a mentor, spending decades encouraging young people who had experienced fear, neglect, and abuse. Whenever a frightened child believed no one cared, Michael remembered the man who had once stopped singing for him. Years later, during an interview, he was asked what he remembered most about meeting Elvis Presley. People expected him to mention the concert, or the scarf, or the autograph. Instead, he smiled. The greatest gift Elvis gave me wasn't music. It was the moment he looked at me and said, "You did nothing wrong." I had waited my whole childhood to hear those words. They changed my life. Long after the lights dimmed, long after the applause faded, long after the songs became history, one truth remained. Legends are not remembered only because of the records they sell, or the stages they fill, or the awards they win. They are remembered because, when faced with a choice between comfort and courage, they choose courage. On that unforgettable night in Las Vegas, Elvis Presley did not become a legend because he sang. He became a legend because he stopped.